Today, we react to a upset-filled, kind of wild week 3 of fantasy football. How should we be reacting to all of these studs, these duds? Are there new tier 1 wide receivers that we should be worried about? All of that and more. And welcome into the Dino Construction Podcast. Justin back here today. Thanks for holding down the fort last week, David, JP. We're really excited to hop into this week. Some exciting football. How are you guys doing this week? I'm maybe losing 2 games out of 13 this week. How are you two doing?
Having a pretty good week. Have one coming down to the wire right now that I'm probably going to lose, unfortunately.
Shame. JP, how'd you do in Megala Dynasty this week? Did you win?
Well, this was my worst week so far in a lot of ways, especially because the Falcons couldn't pull through. They played good though, so I'm at least encouraged by them. And my fantasy team still look good. Got a lot of Rashi Rice.
You do. All right, David, start us off with Thursday Night Football, will you?
Sure, yeah. Let's start with the Jets versus the Patriots. As far as the Patriots studs go, really the only one to talk about, Demario Douglas. After no targets last week, hit a 35% target share this week and 14.8 fantasy points. Still kind of a risky start, but maybe a flex play in some deeper leagues. Didn't really have any duds from the Jets, and quite honestly, everyone with the Patriots outside of Douglas was pretty much a dud. Kind of want to mention for sure Ramondre here. He was on the verge of being like a lineup lock kind of guy. Only 0.3 points this week. Definitely disappointing. Still startable, but very game script dependent, it seems like. Garrett Wilson didn't have a great one. Not a dud, though. Something we want to talk about here in a minute, I think. First, though, Drake May getting his first NFL action. Very limited. Didn't really have anything to take away from it, but definitely wanted to bring that up. And then before we talk about the Jets, who probably the only team that really matter for fantasy here, just want to ask you guys, Christian Gonzalez, Patriots corner, looking really good so far. Is he starting to impact your start-sit decisions at all?
Maybe a little bit because that defense looks really good overall. I might need a little bit more of a sample size, but he looked good against Garrett Wilson, and he's probably in that top 5 cornerback conversation right now.
Yeah, I think it's one of those where if it's a start sit decision, right? If it's this wide receiver 3 versus this wide receiver 3 type of guy, yeah, but am I going to sit a Garrett Wilson, a Devontae Adams type of player? No, but absolutely for flex plays, 100%.
All right, now to the Jets, who actually have some interesting weapons. Not the guy I thought I'd be mentioning first, but Justin, is Alan Lazard startable?
In a pinch, if you have to. He's the type of guy that probably is going to end up with around 10, possibly more touchdowns at the end of the season just because of that mind meld that he has with Aaron Rodgers. So a guy who can get a touchdown and 50 yards, 5 receptions any week, that's startable. I don't want to start him as a wide receiver 1, 2, or 3 on a team, but as a flex play, especially during bye weeks, he's the type of guy you don't mind having on your roster. Absolutely.
And JP, what about Braylon Allen? Definitely getting a bit more work than we expected.
Yeah, man, I'm pretty close because Braylon Allen, he's currently PFF's #1 graded running back in the entire NFL by rushing grade. Yeah, I mean, with bye weeks coming up, I might start him in that scenario, but right now, I still think Breece Hall is the #1 guy that, is going to take most of the touches in that backfield. He's currently on pace, Breece Hall, for 261 carries, 963 yards, 91 receptions, 680 yards receiving, 17 total touchdowns, and that would be good for 357 PPR points, or would have been RB2 in 2023. So I'm still feeling pretty darn good about Breece, but Braylon Allen, he might start to eat more into that workload with how good he's looked.
Well, thanks for answering the question I didn't ask, which is going to be, how do you feel about Breece Hall? I think we're not worried about him. Justin, you're not worried about him either, I assume?
I mean, I prefer a guy that has the full workload if possible, but I mean, who else is up in that tier, right? We have Jahmyr Gibbs right up there. I mean, Monty's out touching him right now. Like, obviously, Bijan is doing pretty well in the snap shares, but Algier, if you're watching the game, is eating into it too. There's not workhorse RBs. And when you see a guy like CMC, who kind of has been that at times, like out with injuries right now, I mean, it's so rare. I want a guy that can win me a week. Breece can do that with one touch. So
I also am not worried about Breece. Last guy I want to talk about in this game, Garrett Wilson. Kind of a slower start than we were hoping, but still shows his talent on the field. Definitely heard some comments Roger said after the game about how defenses have been looking to take him away. You guys worried about this going forward? We still think he's a stud wide receiver. How are you feeling about this?
It seems like the breakout that we might have hoped for, it doesn't look like it's off to a great start. The one thing I wanted to talk about with Garrett Wilson was the matchups that he's had, they have been really tough. I mean, I'm a little bit lower on him than I was, but this is pretty notable, I thought. In week 1, he played against San Francisco, really strong defense. Then he played Willie Snead, of the Tennessee Titans, who's probably a top 5 corner. Then he played New England and Christian Gonzalez. Now, next week, he plays against Pat Surtain and the Broncos. So he's had a really tough schedule here to start. And then after that, he plays at Minnesota, which outside of the Steelers might be one of the best defenses in the league. And by the way, he plays the Steelers week 7 as well. So I don't really think he's going to be a guy who's going to win you weeks until maybe later in the season. It kind of seems like the trust isn't 100% there with Aaron Rodgers at this point, but I think it's growing and he still looks very good, although he was salvaged this week with a touchdown.
Yeah, and on that Aaron Rodgers note, I know David probably could talk more on this, but he's definitely very much so a trust and timing throw type of guy. So with, the Achilles last year, just having 2 off seasons and a few games now playing with him, there's not a lot of that, right? Like, so there's definitely a lot of hope that can build down the road. But I mean, just a quarterback who's getting older and then a lot of uncertainty. Is Aaron Rodgers going to play next year? Who knows? And even then, he's 500 years old. I've got a lot of concern for Garrett Wilson as far as I don't see him really being able to make that like ascension to tier 1 that people were hoping last year into this year that he could make. And I think there's other guys we'll talk about later who maybe have definitely leapfrogged him if they weren't already ahead of him.
Definitely not the start we hoped for, but I am still a believer in the talent personally. JP, you want to go to the next game for us?
Next game we have here is the Broncos versus the Buccaneers, and the Broncos shock the Buccaneers here, getting the win. The fantasy studs, we've got Chris Godwin with 9 targets and a touchdown. He continues to be one of the best draft picks you could have made this offseason. Bo Nix, he got it done with his legs in this one with 47 rushing yards and a rushing touchdown. He didn't have his passing touchdown yet, but he didn't have any interceptions, and this was Bo's best week. It's encouraging to see that he had this kind of a week. The fantasy duds, Baker Mayfield, he kind of comes back to earth here with 163 passing yards, 1 touchdown, 1 INT, and nothing on the ground. And that's the problem with Baker Mayfield is if he's not giving you 200 plus passing yards and 2 touchdowns as well, he's got nothing on the ground there. So that's going to happen every once in a while with these kind of guys. But Mike Evans, only 2 catches for 17 yards. And this is back-to-back weeks that Mike Evans has busted. Are you guys thinking that maybe Chris Godwin might be a better play than Mike Evans right now?
It's tough to say. We just saw a full season of evidence to the contrary, as well as a week 1 of evidence to the contrary. So I'm certainly not going to say that I would, in redraft, have that, gumption to make that stance. But it's possible. I mean, Evans is a bit older. Godwin is now playing out of the slot, which is where we saw him do the best, and he's looking phenomenal. So I think it's pretty close. I definitely, if I had to make a start-sit decision between the two, I would probably start Godwin, though, until I see otherwise.
I guess my answer would be if you have to make a start-sit decision between Evans and Godwin, you're in a pretty good shape. So good for you. It's going to be week to week. Evans definitely isn't cooked, in my opinion. It's nice to see him back as a main part of this offense, but I would not be surprised if Evans outscores Godwin from this point on and vice versa. So
good players going to score points 100%. Now let's talk about a player that we're not so sure is that good. Rachaad White. That's one that I'm very interested in. I was ruminating on this weekend. I actually started Irving in more leagues than I started Rachaad White in this week and ended up being happy about that decision. So the end line for Irving was 9 carries for 70 yards on the ground, 3 receptions for 14. For Rachaad White, again, 6 for 17 on the ground, 5 receptions for 18 yards. Irving probably as like the perceived backup. I haven't looked up like stacked box numbers and percentages, but it's pretty much just common sense. He probably has it a little bit easier than Rachaad White has, right? But I mean, 9 for 70 compared to 6 for 17. We're not comparing apples and oranges. We're comparing apples and watermelon. There was a lot of talk about him being able to overtake the backfield. And do you guys think that's happening right now? Do you think Irving is taking the job from White slowly here?
I think it's at least becoming a split. Like White was inefficient last year, even though he was very high scoring. It was mostly due to his volume. Bucky didn't perform well at the combine, but we knew he was a good player based on tape. And he kind of looks like the same guy who's difficult to tackle out in space in the NFL. I'm not sure he's ever going to have a full workload though. So definitely hurts White, but I don't think it'll ever be more than a split personally.
What would you be willing to pay JP for Irving? Or first, are you interested in buying, I guess?
I might be if I needed like an RB2 in a pinch or a flex play. He does look good, and he gets the ball out of the backfield, and he's having the explosive plays that Rachaad White is not getting. So I wouldn't pay a second, definitely not that. But a third, I would.
I think it's going to take minimally 2/3. I just turned down a third for him in one league where I have him. Are you paying 2/3?
I don't know that I'm going to quite do that since I'm not sure. Like David said, that he has the upside to be a bell cow, but I'm getting pretty close. If he starts to really take more and more every single week.
I'd make the argument that there's only 5 running backs or so in the NFL that have the upside to be a bell cow. David, would you consider a 2-3 swap for him if you felt like the 2 is a little bit later?
It would have to be a late 2 for me to even think about it, but even then, probably not. I think I can buy more production for that price personally.
So not a lot of long-term necessarily faith in like having value.
I need to see more before I pay for the long term there. Running backs are just so fickle in this league.
They sure are.
The last thing I really wanted to point out here was that the backfield for the Denver Broncos, Tyler Beatty, he had the most carries in this backfield. So that's quite a concern for both Julian McLaughlin and Javonte Williams. If this is going to be a three-way timeshare, I don't want to start any of these guys. But Tyler Beatty is somebody that you got to keep your eye on. And if he is on waiver wires, you're going to want to pick him up probably if he's going to be leading a backfield potentially.
And our next game here on the docket, Texans versus Vikings. Surprising 2-0 teams. The Vikings dominated here. Aaron Jones, 148 total yards, 5 receptions, and a tutty. Justin Jefferson, I mean, the guy's phenomenal. Led the team in receiving, hauled in a touchdown. Sam Darnold, 4 passing touchdowns on only 17 completions. I'd love for him to keep up that almost 25% touchdown ratio. Diggs, PPR his way to 19.4 fantasy points with 10 catches. And on the duds side, really Stroud just laid an egg. 1 touchdown, 2 interceptions, 215 passing yards. These Vikings, you mentioned their defense earlier when we were talking about a future matchup for Garrett Wilson. They're looking good.
Yeah, I mean, we don't normally talk about defenses, but they seem to be one of the matchups that you might want to avoid here. And I just wanted to highlight that the matchups that they've had against quarterbacks, Daniel Jones had no touchdowns, 2 picks. Brock Purdy had 1 touchdown, 1 pick. I mean, he's a pretty good quarterback. And CJ Stroud's a great one where he had 1 touchdown and 2 interceptions. And these are all mostly non-mobile guys, but if you have a pocket passer going against the Minnesota Vikings defense, that's a pretty scary matchup. And next week it's going to be Jordan Love, who he's had the injury. So are you going to start Darnold or Love next week if you have to make the decision?
I'd start Darnold. I'd start Darnold over a lot of players. In fact, I have that decision next week in our DGens league, and Darnold is in my lineup for sure.
I think I'd still go Love for now. It depends on practice reports. If it looks like it's very questionable that he's going to play, maybe I'll go Darnold. But I mean, what the Packers offense is doing with Malik Willis is impressive. You put in an MVP caliber quarterback into that. I just think he's going to pick up where he left off last year. And Darnold's not a bad start, but I'm definitely a start your studs kind of guy. So that's where I would lean.
Yeah, start your studs like Sam Darnold. I mean, a fully healthy Love, I would be starting over Darnold, but just coming off the injury, I just have enough concern that I think I would go with Darnold.
Now, with the way that Darnold's looked, I think Hawkinson, he might be somebody that you might be able to buy low if are winning games and you don't need the production right now. Because there's some teams that might be 1-2 and get desperate for some production. But I think Darnold, with how he's looking so far, we know Hawkinson can be really good. But I don't think there's a whole lot more to talk about the Vikings other than Aaron Jones has looked really good. He's a lineup lock, isn't he?
I think so, as long as he's healthy.
Yeah, I mean, he's pretty much been that his whole career. If he's healthy, he's pretty much been a lineup lock, just not a historically healthy running back for full seasons.
The thing I most want to talk about here is looking at these wide receivers for the Texans. The Texans offense really struggled. Diggs had a good game with 12 targets in a revenge game still, I guess, right? It wasn't his last team, but it was his first. Nico still 10 targets, looking like a stud. And Tank Dell, even with only 6, it's an increase from last week. I'm a little worried about my Tank Dell shares. I'm not going to lie. I don't have data to back this up, but I kind of wonder if the way defenses have adjusted across the NFL is affecting him more than the others. Definitely a big play guy, and there haven't been as many big plays in the NFL this year. Not giving up yet, but certainly feeling like I might have swung and missed on that one.
Take us to our next game, David.
Sure. Next game, we're going to talk about the Chargers versus Steelers. Fields had a nice day. Probably be a top 12 quarterback. Calvin Austin did have a really good day, but mostly thanks to a 55-yard touchdown. Maybe the wide receiver 2 on that team. I don't know that we really care, though. Fantasy duds. Jalen Warren only had 4 opportunities for 1 total yards. Gus Edwards, again, not looking good. First question I want to ask you guys here on this game, kind of went over it in week 1, said if he keeps winning, maybe this will happen. You think Fields has done enough to get the job?
I mean, with them being 3-0, I think that really helps the game out a lot because I think Russ is probably a slightly better passer, but I mean, Justin Fields, he gets his explosive plays on the ground. So I think if they keep winning, they're just going to keep rolling him out there, but it's definitely not a certainty.
I've watched a bit of them playing this year, and they're winning these games because their defense is just phenomenal, and he does just barely enough. I do think that they can run out a slightly better offense with Russell Wilson. I do think that they will go to that still. However, if week 5 comes along and Fields is still starting because of the injury and they're 5-0, even 4-0, all bets kind of go off. I don't know. But I do think the offense would just run a little bit better. Maybe it's just my greed wanting my Pickens shares to do a little bit better because I think Wilson would support him a little bit better. But I do think they still go to Wilson. Maybe it's just take luck.
Yeah, it's going to be hard to switch if they're undefeated, but you just never quite know there. I do think Tomlin will make the decision that's best for the Steelers, not best for fantasy, though. So just kind of have to monitor that. On the other side of the ball, Chargers offense has not looked good. Herbert's kind of hurt right now. Are you guys willing to start Dobbins if Herbert doesn't play next week?
I think it's matchup dependent at this point. I don't think he's a lineup lock, but I think he is sort of the flex play because Justin Herbert not being there is really going to limit the scoring opportunities. But he looks way better than Gus Edwards, so he should be a volume play, I think, at the very least.
Yeah, I mean, just depends on who you have, but certainly a top 24-ish RB play just because of the explosiveness. So unless you're loaded, I think you might have to force him in your lineup. One thing I want to touch on in this game with the Herbert injury, I just want to ask, is it Easton Stick, do you think, or Heineke that is our priority backup ad off of waivers? Who do you guys think is actually going to be starting there if Herbert's out?
I think Stick is listed as the backup, right?
I saw on Sleeper Heineke was, but I haven't looked at the official team depth chart.
I prefer the official backup because that's all we really have to go on, but probably not worth starting either.
Heineke is listed on ESPN as the backup on it.
I mean, even if I needed a start, I don't know that I'm starting the quarterback for a run heavy team without really great wide receiver options. But if they're both available, I mean, maybe I'll take a flyer on one, but I'm not that interested personally.
I think it's not a huge injury, just the ankle sprain, but Heineke is a solid NFL quarterback. I think he is worth a add off of waivers because I do think if we were to see like a reasonable amount of time missed by Herbert for any reason, I think you could see him having like an Andy Dalton type of value jump, a guy who knows how to play in the NFL. So I don't know. I just thought that was worth mentioning. I'm picking him up off waivers for free. I'm not trading anything for him, but definitely I think worth a roster spot.
I think with Taylor Heineke, I think he's a little bit more aggressive. So I think I'd be a little bit more interested if it is him because he at least seems like he's going to push it down the field a little bit more than what we've seen from Easton Stick. But Lad McConkey, he had 6 targets, and it's hard to take anything away from this game because the Steelers' defense is just dominant. But Lad McConkey, he's tied for the 4th highest targets per route run through 3 weeks. He's tied with Deontay Johnson, funny enough, Amon-Ra St. Brown, and he's behind just Rashee Rice, Malik Neighbors. He's actually tied for 3rd. And then I want to touch on just Quentin Johnson. He had a touchdown. It was a busted coverage. There's only 2 targets as well. I watched the play. He literally just ran in a straight line, just had a ball dropped to him. But I'm still not willing to start Quentin Johnson. Do you guys have any Ladd or Johnson thoughts?
I think it's kind of funny that Ladd is doing what he did at Georgia so far, not playing as much as we would like, but getting targeted a lot while he's playing. And still no real thoughts on Quentin Johnson. He's probably not as bad as we all thought, but he's still probably not worth. I mean, definitely not worth starting yet, but maybe not even worth a roster spot still. I don't know. Depends on the league, I guess.
Yeah, I'm still trying to liquidate him. Probably taking any 3rd for him unless it's a best ball league. Maybe you could hold and try to get more, but I just don't think he's going to do enough to really merit that more. So moving on from him 100%, and love to see it with Ladd. Like you'd rather see them be productive and look good when they're on the field, but give him the full-time job. Come on, coach, put him in. JP, do you want to take us to the next game?
All right, Eagles versus the Saints here. The Eagles get the win, and Saquon Barkley, yet again, is a stud here with 147 rush yards and 2 touchdowns. You're going to start him every single week. He looks really good in that offense. Dallas Goedert, oh my gosh, he has 10 catches for 170 yards. That was quite the surprise. I know he was starting in a lot of spots too, so some people really reap those benefits there. But Chris Olave, he came through this week with a touchdown and had 20.6 fantasy points. Now his teammate Rashid Shaheed didn't have a single catch, had a 0-point day. I think he's just who we thought he was coming into the season, kind of a boom bust player. He just got those 2 deep touchdowns week 1 and 2. You got to start him only if you need him. Like, I don't think he's a lineup lock or flex lock even at this point. Maybe if you're an underdog and you need a big play, I could see maybe in that scenario. But Derek Carr, he comes back to earth as well with 142 passing yards, 1 touchdown, 1 pick. Jalen Hurts, he didn't have a touchdown and he had an interception. And for a mobile guy, he only had 25 rush yards. So yeah, we're pretty disappointed with Jalen Hurts this week. Justin, do you think Saquon's elite ability at the goal line is going to take away those opportunities for Hurts to have double-digit goal line touchdowns?
It kind of looks like it. I mean, so far between that, the fact that we've seen, at least in limited sample size, the tush push seems to be less effective than it was. Obviously, with Jason Kelsey as the center there, there's definitely concern. I kind of had to take that Hertz was still kind of close to that tier one of quarterbacks, and I think he's probably. I'd certainly take Lamar over him at this point. When at the very least they were neck and neck beforehand.
I agree. And we talked about how there's not really any bell cows in the league. I think Saquon, he might be the guy that is getting the most touches in his backfield. Would he go 101 in redraft if we were to redraft today, David?
I kind of think maybe Justin Jefferson would at this point, but he's definitely in the conversation. I think he would in a lot of leagues. Yeah.
I would take Saquon at 101, typically in a redraft league. A lot of good wide receivers, not that many good RBs. I mean, you can get Deontay Johnson in the sixth.
Now, considering the state of the tight end position, it's also a pretty weak position, especially this year. We thought it was going to be really good, but Dallas Goedert, is he a must start after this huge performance? And
If you don't have any of the studs, probably, yeah. I'm not starting them over guys that we previously thought were going to be elite. Maybe it's take lock, but I'd even start Pitts over him still currently. But that one's, could change as early as next week.
I would say keep an eye on it for this week because I probably am starting Goddard over probably anyone but about 2 to 3 tight ends. And this is an if AJ Brown is still out and Devontae Smith had a concussion in the game. So if both Smith and Brown are out, I mean, he's going to have to force feed it to Goddard. Obviously, you can double or cover Goddard a little bit better without those other guys out there. But if he doesn't have the target competition, I think it's something to keep on where he might be a top 5 tight end play if he's the only guy out there. The reason we don't like him as much isn't because we don't think he's a good player. It's just because AJ Brown and Smith are kind of alphas, you know?
yeah, certainly so. I mean, and Jahan Dotson, you would have hoped that he would step up, and he's just looked really bad. I don't know if he's still getting acclimated or if he's just bad, but is he somebody you would even consider starting if you
Sorry. I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next game because the answer is no. So we're going to go ahead and ignore that Jahan Dotson question because we're not starting him. So our next game, Packers versus Titans, fantasy studs, Malik Willis, pass touchdown, Russ touchdown, 73 rushing yards, good game. Emmanuel Wilson had a long receiving touchdown, a lot of garbage time carries, seems to be the RB2 on the Packers, at least until Marshawn Lloyd is healthy, possibly even after he is. Hopkins finishes with 19.3 fantasy points. Looks like he's healthy. The duds, Dontavian Wicks, not a catch. Romeo Dobbs, 1 catch for 18 yards. Pollard, 5.9 fantasy points, only has 6 carries, largely due to the game script. That could potentially be a concern for the Titans all season, right? And then Ridley, 1 catch for 9 yards. Are we worried, David, that Josh Jacob only out-touched Wilson by 1?
I don't think so. This game close early on, but it kind of pulled away for a while. Jacobs has looked really good in his opportunities so far. I do expect Emmanuel Wilson to keep getting opportunities as long as he's producing like he is. The floor is always, at least from my experience as a Packers coach, he's always kind of like to share the load of the backfield. But Jacobs is still a locked and loaded starter for me every week.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm starting him where I have him. And JP, you had some insights on the Packers target breakdown.
Yeah, Ryan Heath on X, he had a great tweet about this. The Green Bay target shares in week 3, Jaden Reed had 36.6%. And this is kind of what we've seen in the first week when Jordan Love was healthy, was that Jaden Reed was looking like he might be the alpha in this room. But Dontavian Wicks, Romeo Dobbs, Christian Watson, they all just had a 10.5% target share. Of course, this is just this week. But Tucker Kraft, keep an eye on him because he had a 15.8% target share. It was the second best of this group. And if Jordan Love comes back and is good, he might be startable in today's tight end landscape.
I'm just over here laughing because I got a trade offer from JP for Tucker Kraft this morning. Like, what does JP say about Tucker Kraft in the show sheet?
David, does Luke Musgrave, is he just not involved or is there an injury there?
Kraft is just a much better blocker. I assume Kraft will still keep playing more than Musgrave when Love's back, but certainly while they're a very, very heavy run first team with Willis, Kraft is definitely going to play over him. But let's move on to our next game, the Giants versus the Browns. This one was not very exciting for fantasy purposes, so I'm just going to give some cliff notes, then I'm going to open the discussion for the conversation I think will be interesting at least. Our studs, Neighbors had a great game. Devin Singletary had a great game that would have been better if he was a little more selfish, went down at the 1 so the Giants could kneel the ball and run the clock out. Mari Cooper rebounding and actually having a nice day. As far as the duds, probably a few other people could qualify here, but I just put Deonta Foreman in. He was starting to become fringe startable to in some leagues, but only 2 rushes for 5 yards, definitely not good. Only real question I have here about this game, guys, with how Neighbors has played, with how Marv has looked, I just want to have a discussion about these top 6 Dynasty receivers, whether or not they're in the same tier, if we still have 2 tiers, and how we split it up. Those 6 obviously being Justin Jefferson, CD, Jamar Chase, Amon Ra, Marvin, Neighbors.
I think it's possible to, based on just what we've seen so far, make the argument we should have in his own tier Justin Jefferson, just because he has been solid every game, hasn't had a dud game this year. We've seen some down games from Chase, Amon Ra, CD just didn't have that great of a game this week. Jefferson's been pretty steady, and I'm not quite ready to. Well, I mean, actually, I'm probably ready to put Neighbors up into this tier, and Marv, I think, probably belongs more or less up there as well. So I think there's 2 ways of looking at it. One of them might be like a Justin Jefferson CD tier of its own, which I still think CD I'd have as the only one who maybe should be up there, and the other 4 in like a tier 2, or all 6 of them together in a tier 1. But I do think that those guys are approaching 2.5 to 3 firsts of value. If they were not, Marv probably was already close to there. Neighbors is probably worth about that 3 firsts almost. Obviously, not trading the 101 and 2 other firsts next year if I have that or anything like that. I'm willing to package 3 firsts of like mid to late firsts of value between players and picks if I can to try to get those guys, especially start 9, start 10, start 11. It gets a little dicier, but man, Neighbors looks good.
Okay, yeah. Malik Neighbors, holy cow. One of the things that coming out of college I didn't really see a ton of was just making those incredible contested catches. And wow, this weekend he made some incredible catches where he had to go up and get it. And I did not know that he was able to do that. And if you got a guy who's separating is that great as a yak threat, and he's got that in his bag too to go up and just get those red zone balls. And I mean, Daniel Jones did not give him a great ball, and he could still go up and get that. It was incredible. So I do think Malik Neighbors, he might be the dynasty wide receiver 3 or 4 at this point. And I think that this conversation is more so about how good Marv and Neighbors has been. I'm personally not super worried about Jamar Chase. The Bengals are playing right now as we're recording. I mean, he's got 2 touchdowns and over 100 yards. So I think most of it with Jamar Chase was due to the fact that he literally did not practice all offseason with the team. So yeah, I mean, he should have to practice pretty much a few days before they had their first game, and they're just like at walkthroughs at that point. So I'm not worried about Jamar Chase. I still have him up there because he's connected to Joe Burrow, but I can't blame you if you have Jefferson in the tier all alone. But I personally still have Chase and probably Neighbors and CD at this point.
It's definitely quite a turnaround for our resident Neighbors hater. So I love to see it. I kind of think Justin hit the nail on the head. It's either JJ in his own and everybody else, or it's everybody in one tier. The way I look at it is if you try to get, maybe you can get a second on top of, Neighbors or Marv if you're tearing down from JJ CD, maybe Chase, I guess. But you're not going to get anything of real value anymore. You used to be able to probably get a first or a first second swap at least. I don't know if that's happening right now. So I kind of think they're all in the same tier personally.
So help me formulate a trade offer real quick. I'm actually thinking of trying to put Waddle or Pickens with a first and a second for Neighbors. Is that a low ball? Would you pay one of those guys and 2 firsts and a start 9 for Neighbors?
It depends on where those firsts are, but if they're playoff firsts, yeah, I think I would.
I could cherry pick some playoff firsts. I have like 5 of them.
I probably wouldn't do Waddle in 2 first, but Pickens in 2 first, I might do that. I wanted to highlight with the Malik Neighbors. He's on pace for 210 targets right now. And I mean, I expect that to come down a little bit, but he has a 35.2% target share, and he just looks incredible. I don't think Daniel Jones really is a third anywhere else.
Yeah, it is a wild situation. I don't think any of us expected Daniel Jones to be able to support him quite this way. JP, will you move us on to the next game here?
Yep, we got the Bears versus the Colts. We have fantasy studs Caleb Williams. I mean, he threw it 52 times, so this isn't a huge surprise, but he looked a little bit better in this game. Adunze had a breakout game with 23.4 fantasy points. I'd love to see that. Cole Kmet, 25.7 fantasy points. Holy cow, he had 11 targets. Now, I mean, Caleb Williams threw it a ton, like I said, 52 times, but still 10 catches for 97 yards and a touchdown. Jonathan Taylor, he looked phenomenal. He had 26.5 fantasy points with 2 rushing touchdowns. Still not super involved in the receiving game, but he looked amazing. Fantasy duds, we have DeAndre Swift. And boy, oh boy, I am pretty concerned about DeAndre Swift. Thankfully, I don't have him anywhere, but DeAndre Swift, he had 13 carries for 20 yards. He didn't pick up a single first down in the entire game. And I just think that Khalil Herbert and Roshan Johnson, they would just be way better for this offense because Caleb Williams is consistently putting third and longs, and it's just really hurting the offense because when you don't have a great offensive line, he doesn't really create by getting physical in the run game.
Yeah, Swift, non-starter. Not any interest in him. I'm not going to start him. I just don't think he's that good. Watched him with my Lions for a while. JT though, I don't know. Like I think we kind of had a discussion not that long ago. Is H-Ad RB4? I think JT's throwing his hat in the ring there for that RB4 conversation here too with how he's playing. I just wish they would throw the ball to him, but they don't seem to want to do it.
Yeah, I mean, the week prior, he had 2 really bad drops. I just don't think he's a great pass catcher, but he could still see a little bit more than this because it's kind of like the Derrick Henry thing. If you just throw him the ball, once he's in open space, he's really, really good. But the wide receivers, is there anybody you want to start, David, in this wide receiver group right now?
Anybody I want to start? No. Am I willing to start? I'm still willing to start Pittman if I have to. In deeper leagues, I guess Pierce was with his big playability. Maybe Downs, I still want to see more. It was nice to see him back out there. I'm looking for options though to start over all 3 of these guys if I have them. Definitely.
Yeah, I mean across the field, I'm starting DJ Moore and Roma Dunze over Pity City at this point. Just because, I mean, until I see Pittman scoring 13 fantasy points every week, I'm not really feeling very confident in him. I have to start him in one league. It's like it's him or starting Alexander Madison. So I'm starting Pittman, but yeah, I have no confidence in him. I think I'd probably rank him around like a wide receiver 40-ish, honestly, until I see something different from the offense.
Yeah, Anthony Richardson, he doesn't really seem like he's throwing the ball short a whole lot, and that's kind of where Michael Pittman's kind of made his money. But Josh Downs, I mean, he also operates in that area. So it kind of seems like the reason Alec Pierce has been valuable is because Anthony Richardson throws the ball deep at such a high rate. So Michael Pittman, he doesn't really do that as much. And I think that even when you do start him, you're kind of just hoping for 10 to 12 fantasy points because I don't think he's really going to give you many boom weeks with Anthony Richardson.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. Just want to briefly gloss over Cole Kmet, no real interest. We're not starting him. He's great in best ball. Otherwise, and he's not great in best ball. If I could get any value for him, I'd still probably take it. But that's the only place I have him rostered, or that's the only place that I'm considering getting any points for him in my lineup at the very least. So moving on to our next game, Dolphins versus Seahawks. One of these teams showed up. That was the Seahawks. Fantasy studs, DK Metcalf, 4 for 104 on 6 targets. Chabanez went 18 for 91 and 3 for 16 through the air. Heck of a game. Fantasy duds. We saw Skylar Thompson, 4.38 points. He did leave with a rib injury, so did not play the whole game, but certainly him and all Dolphins players. Nobody went over 10 points for the Dolphins. Do want to point out JSN, 3 for 39 on 3 targets. Lockett had a little bit better of a game. I think the big question for me, I'm not taking anything away from the Dolphins besides that I don't know that I really want to start anybody outside of Tyreek and Achan until Tua's back. Do you guys agree with that?
Yeah, hard to disagree with that. Waddle if you have to, but
I agree. Yeah, Waddle is more of a wide receiver 2 play, even with Tua there. So yeah, I think he's more like a wide receiver 4 fantasy. So I don't really want to start him.
And while I do think they're good flex plays, JSN and Lockett, in a, let's just say a 2 wide receiver, 1 flex, like a traditional redraft type of boring league, do you consider JSN or Lockett lineup locks? How many flexes do I have to add before you consider them a lineup lock? Are they a top 36 play for you right now?
probably not. I don't think so at wide receiver at least. I love JSN and I'm willing to bet on the upside with him. But yeah, I have plenty of other guys that I'm probably starting over him. Where you drafted him, you probably don't have to start him. So,
David, are you starting Jalen Waddle or JSN?
probably that's tough. Probably JSN. What if I throw Pittman in the mix? How we doing there?
JSN still out of those three.
Yeah, I mean, at JSN, we saw that he had the upside, to have a huge week last week. So this week, I do think part of it was game script, but there's 2 out of 3 weeks where he hasn't been great. So I kind of want to see more. But if it was three wide receiver and a flex, I think I probably would start him there.
Yeah, I think he definitely has a lot of upside. David, move us on to the next game here, will you?
Sure. Kind of a surprising one. Panthers against the Raiders. We had a little bit of a revival of the Panthers offense. Justin, you want to go ahead and celebrate for a second?
Our savior.
Deontay Johnson. Woo!
That's right. Justin's favorite and most invested in player for this season actually had a good week. 14 targets. So you love to see that. Gives you a lot of hope going forward. Andy Dalton threw for over 300 yards, 3 touchdowns. First quarterback to do 303 this year. Chuba had 21 rushes, 114 yards, 5 catches, 55 yards, and a touchdown. Crazy that we see this offense pick up like it did. On the other side, Trey Tucker, 7 for 96 with 9 targets and 1 touchdown. Jacoby Myers, 7 for 62 with one and a 2-point conversion. On the other side, though, Devontae did not do very well. Zamir White did not do very well either. And I know it wasn't a fantasy dud because obviously nobody started him. But Dalton, looking so good, looks very bad for Bryce. So I kind of want to start the discussion there. We talked about it a little last week, but now that we have this extra evidence, are we willing to buy low on Bryce at all? Like a third even?
Let me ask your question with a question. Would you rather Spencer Rattler or Bryce Young?
I think Bryce Young still, but that's a pretty damning question, all things considered.
I might be a Rattler because the difference between Andy Dalton and Bryce Young, oof, he's got the first overall pick attached to him, so he's probably going to get another shot. So would I send a third? I might on a rebuilding team just take that swing, but I don't even know if I'm certain about that.
Yeah, I mean, I want to say last week I easily would have told you I'd pay 2/3 for him. This week I'd send a third and a fourth. I don't know if I'd even do 2/3, but I'd certainly pay a third and a fourth still, just off of the upside of it. Still, I think it's just the type of swing I like to take is on this type of bet.
I would typically agree. It's just the fact that Bryce Young he doesn't push the ball downfield a ton and he doesn't really get rushing yards. So even if he does start, I don't know if I'm starting him, if he's on another team, but I don't know. It's at least worth, something to monitor. And if he's a starter, you want to roster any starter, obviously. If you can get any starter for a third, it's not too bad.
And I mean, we are seeing this revival, right? Baker Mayfield, even like Goff had to move on from a team. Obviously, he had some success, but moved on from a team. Sam Darnold moving on, like these top elite drafted like prospects, right? Even if they have to move on from one team to another, these are the types of guys that usually get another chance, even if it's years down the road. Like Darnold has seen a lot of time riding the bench before getting this opportunity, but I think he's like the type of guy, but also he might be the type of guy that I pick up off of waivers in a year. So and make that bet that way too. So maybe I'm kind of talking my way out of it because if it's a 2-year path, then I could probably get him for free sometime between now and 2 years from now. So I think maybe you guys are kind of right here.
Going back to the JSN conversation, who you start between Deontay and JSN at this point?
Deontay, shut up! Don't even ask stupid questions. Deontay is like wide receiver 1 overall. No, I'm just kidding. But I view Deontay as about like wide receiver 20-ish. Maybe I'm a little high on him, but like that's kind of where he is in my weekly rankings until I see otherwise. Somewhere in there. I think he could be a wide receiver 1 any week, and his probably floor is about wide receiver 30. I don't know if you saw, but Adam Thielen has a hamstring injury too, so might be out for a few weeks too. So I mean, it's just pour them targets in, pour them targets into 14 wasn't enough. Let's get Cooper Cup numbers, baby.
There's just one more thing I want to mention about the Panthers with this revitalized offense, especially if Jonathan Brooks is sitting on your redraft leagues on waivers, probably about time to pick him up. He can come back as soon as week 5. Not positive that's going to happen, but this offense looks better, and he's a very highly touted prospect who could be a big help for your playoff push. Just the last thing I want to touch on in this game before we move on. Some rumors that Aiden O'Connell might be starting for the Raiders this week. Does that impact your decisions at all? Do you think of it any differently as if he's starting or if Minshew is starting?
I'm playing my talented players. I'm going to keep them in.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I'm still not starting anybody that's not named Devontae Adams or Brock Bowers, and I think I'm starting those two regardless. Just those two are still my only lineup blocks.
All right, moving on to the next game, we have the Ravens versus the Cowboys, and the Ravens get the win here. Fantasy studs, we have Lamar Jackson, 27.98 points in 6-point leagues. Derrick Henry had 25 carries for 151 yards and 2 touchdowns. This was a Derrick Henry game, if we were to wrap it up in one sentence there. But he also had a catch through the air. Dak Prescott, 33 fantasy points in 6-point leagues with 379 passing yards. They were behind pretty much the whole time. He was playing catch up. He still looked pretty solid there. Jake Ferguson, in his return, he had 6 catches on 11 targets for 90 yards. He looks healthy. He's probably somebody that you're going to start every week if you don't have a stud. Fantasy duds, Mark Andrews with a goose. Oh my gosh.
Did he play?
33% of snaps, so hardly. Only 1 target on 4 routes, so that's quite a concern. Zay Flowers, he only had 5.3 fantasy points. I think part of that is it was a Derrick Henry day, like I said. I think this will happen every once in a while with Zay Flowers. CD Lamb, not quite a dud, but only 8.7 fantasy points because of a fumble. It's tough to swallow just because the fact that he's a stud, and also Dak had 379 passing yards, so it was pretty disappointing. Jake Ferguson, are you starting him over Mark Andrews going forward, David?
You have to. Like, it's not even a thought. It's sad to say, but you have to.
I'm fine over here. Everything's fine with my Mark Andrews shares. Everything's no. I mean, let's play this game this way. Stop me when I name a tight end that you would not start over Mark Andrews. Bowers, Laporta, McBride, Kincaid, Pitts. Likely?
Ooh.
I think I'm still starting Andrews over likely, personally.
That's fair. I don't agree
But
with that.
We'll name
ranking on-
plenty of others.
I don't agree with that ranking on keep trade cut. But now let's go back to some that you're definitely starting over Andrews. Kittle, Ferguson, Kelsey,
Ooh.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I still have Kelsey.
a healthy Njoku,
Oof.
Ah,
I would need to see.
that's
I would need to see it first.
a healthy Ingram,
probably
Oof, that's
Ingram.
another bad offense.
Muth,
I'm going Andrews.
Goddard.
I think we've hit that area.
So like, we're
One more week for Andrews over Goddard, but if it's like this again, then I'll wear it. It was wrong.
we're pretty deep in there, guys. Like we're pretty dark and deep in those hills before we're like actually saying, "Oh yeah, I'm starting Andrews." And even then we're like, "Probably Andrews." I feel like that's the correct answer. So I think this is kind of red alert. I'm not looking to sell him right now because I just but I'm probably not looking to buy. I think I'm just holding and starting somebody else if I can. So fortunately in a lot of those leagues I do have a different option, and a lot of those other options that are kind of mid tier, it's worth considering them over it. So, not a fun game. Not a fun game as an Andrews owner.
I'm real quick just gonna pull up the stats. Was there anything notable between Zeke and Dowdle?
Zeke. Sorry, I should have put that. Yeah, Zeke. Zeke had a dud of a game from a touch standpoint. He only had 4 touches to Dowdle's 11, so it does look like Dowdle is taking over the backfield. I think it's probably a large part of this was game script was a lot of the issue here on why Dowdle didn't see more work in the rush game, why we didn't see a little bit bigger game out of the running backs was they were just trying to pass it instead of it was a Cavante Turpin and Jalen Tolbert type of game. However, it is something that I am not starting Zeke anywhere, and I am willing to start Dowdle in a pinch if I absolutely have to, but I'm also only starting him if I have to at this point until bye weeks come around, and then we really might need to.
Yeah, Rico Dowdle, he had 5 targets to Zeke's 2, and he also had more carries than Zeke. So it's at least somewhat encouraging that Dowdle's getting 5 targets, because if the game script does go that way, then he's got a pretty solid floor in that scenario. But Zeke is not even sniffing my lineup.
Yeah, and I apologize for looking here. I'm watching the end of the Commanders Bengals game, and I need just a few points from Chase. Doesn't look like I'm going to get them though. So shoot.
Hey, what can you do? Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. I actually had a good fantasy week. Managed to have enough Jaden Daniels points and few enough Brian Robinson points to win the only game that was still up in the air. So at least I won out of the two of us, David. Like, let's celebrate that, right?
Looks like I will be losing with the second most points in the league. I hate when that happens.
Is there a league median at least? That league's archaic. There'll never be one. Moving on to the 49ers versus Rams while David finishes watching that game. Fantasy studs. This guy named Juwan Jennings, I think he had a pretty good game, 11 for 175 and 3. Brock Purdy, 292 and 3, 42 rushing yards. Kyron, 24 for 89 and 2, 2 for 27 and 1 in the air. Duds. There weren't any real like big time like duds, but the one I do want to throw out there is Ayuk, 5 for 48, only 9.8 PPR fantasy points. But given the fact that Kittle, Samuels weren't starting, like people were expecting a breakout game, right? This was the game it was his get right game, and he kind of just showed up. So a little bit disappointing. I don't know. I've never been as high on Ayuk as you guys. I think he's a good player, but I don't know. How do we feel about that? How do we feel about Ayuk?
I think he's one of the Jamar Chase, the CD Lamb, these guys without the training camp. It really seems like it put them on a slow start. But I mean, Ayuk, he had 10 targets, which is pretty encouraging. I know week one he dropped a touchdown. This game he had multiple drops. So it just seems like with such a timing based offense, not having that timing just right and having these drops, I think that's really hindered him. But yeah, it sucks. It really does. And you almost don't even want to start him at this point, but you kind of have to because he's so talented on a great offense. I still have faith that from what we've seen, he's a great player and that he's just, getting back into the rhythm of things, just like we just saw Jamar Chase, who we're about to talk about in a little bit. He got back. CD Lamb, he still doesn't look completely right. So I'm still going to start him. Not super concerned.
I wonder if he's secretly back in Shanahan's doghouse for at least a few games, and that's why they're not going to him. He's done it before. I have no reason to actually think that. Yeah, 10 targets is great. Well, not great, but it's definitely good. It does add some context to the 5 for 48. I'm still probably starting him where I have him, but definitely not going to sell low though.
And then next question related to this wide receiver room. Is Jennings a must start until Debo is back?
I do think with George Kittle's injury and not playing this game, it really boosted Juwan Jennings. And I think you could easily have a game next week where he goes 5 for 40, or he might have another game where he's super involved. But I think Kittle is something that you want to monitor there. You're probably going to consider starting him regardless.
I think in deeper leagues you definitely have to. He's looked like part of the offense even when everyone is healthy, not fantasy relevant part of the offense, but they like him there. He's reliable. I think he's worth a spot start. So would you guys pay a third for him at this point if you needed to? Or a third for the swap or
No, because I mean, I think Pearsall, once he's off the pup, he might be more involved. Kittle's out, Debo's out. So probably not because, yeah, he had a huge game. But like I said, I think that there's a chance that he just is just okay next week.
Yeah, I mean, there's a chance he does something worthwhile again. But if I put the line at point 0.5 more games this season with 20 or more fantasy points, are you taking the over or under on point 0.5 games with 20 fantasy points?
Under.
I'll take the over. Sure.
Now, one for the listener league. Would you guys rather have $11 in Fab or Juwan Jennings?
I'd take Juwan Jennings.
I wish I would have taken him before, even though I already won this week. All right, enough about Jawan Jennings. Let's talk about our next game. We got the Lions versus the Cardinals. Pretty fun one. A lot of fantasy players we care about. Amon Ra going 7 for 75 with one. David Montgomery had a good one. 23 carries, 105 yards, a touchdown. Gibbs, 83 rushing yards, and a really fun receiving line. 0 targets, 0 receptions, 20 yards, 1 touchdown. That was on the hook and lateral. I assume that's how it's officially scored because that's how I've seen it, but maybe it wasn't. Marv, 5 for 64 and a touchdown, 11 targets. Michael Wilson even having a pretty good one, 8 for 64. On the other side, the duds, James Conner, only 3.5 points. McBride, only 3.5, but he did leave with a concussion. And this year's early season breakout star, Jamison Williams, only 1 catch for 9 yards on 3 targets. Could have listed Laporta here, but he did leave with an injury, so we will forgive him. But apparently, we're not forgiving McBride. Interesting. He was diagnosed with an ankle sprain. We'll kind of see how that progresses through the week. We have any panic on Laporta long term? We still liking him as a tier 1 tight end. How we feeling, guys?
I don't know that I don't think I really view him as a tier 1 tight end anymore. I still view him as like a tier 2 tight end in the range of I'd have to rethink my tiers, but probably I have him in the same tier as like Hawkinson, and if Pitts don't like drop out, and they actually start doing something, I'd put them up there with him. But right now they're like a tier below him. And I would say that right now I just have Bowers and McBride kind of in their own, even though Bowers just had a down game. But I think the fact that his rookie year was so touchdown dependent, and now they're not that consistent with targets. I just I am worried. Like I still think he's a good play. I think he's still like a good tight end to have, but I don't think I have him as tier one anymore. And I'm really regretting where I took him as the first tight end in one of our tight end premium leagues earlier this year.
Yeah, and we touched on it last week. I think it's just Jameson Williams. He's the factor that's really drawn targets away here. Although even though Jameson Williams didn't have a huge game, neither did Laporta. Not exactly sure when Laporta left, but I do think that maybe it will be Jameson Williams and Laporte who kind of flip flop back and forth, and one might be a stud next week, and the other one would be the dud. So it is pretty discouraging, but you got to keep starting him.
And I wanted to bring this one up earlier: Goddard or Laporta next week, or if Laporta is cleared and healthy, David.
Would want to look at the matchups before I made a final decision, but if Laporte is healthy, I'm probably starting him unless it's a horrible matchup for him and a great one for Goddard. I would also need. I will let me caveat that if AJB and Devonta Smith both miss, I think probably Goddard.
If just one of them misses, I might go Goddard because I think just with the injury, the low ankle sprain, I think the low ankle is not that bad, but with his involvement and maybe not being 100%, I might just go Goddard if he's going to be the number 2 target next week for the Eagles. I'm not sure if Laporte is the number 2 target.
I don't think he. I don't think he is, at least consistently. So definitely some concern there. JP, will you move us on to the last game from the Sunday games?
Yeah, we have my Falcons playing the Chiefs, and it was a really good game, but the Chiefs ended up winning. Rashee Rice had a huge game. He had 12 for 110 yards and a touchdown on 14 targets. Drake London had 9 targets, 6 for 67, and a touchdown. Darnell Mooney continues to be very involved in the offense, has 8 catches for 66 yards. Fantasy duds, we have Xavier Worthy, he had 5 fantasy points. Travis Kelce had 4 for 30. He continues to just be very concerning, as we talked about. Kyle Pitts, another concerning tight end, a little bit here with 2 for 59. How worried are you, David, about Kyle Pitts?
I mean, you have to be, right. Like the big play was nice to see. Don't get me wrong, but he just continues to be disappointing week after week, year after year, and I'll be a sucker again, and I'll continue to be a sucker for at least a few more weeks here because boy, does he look good when he looks good. It's just so rare that it happens. The whole tight end position sucks and he has huge upside, so it's hard to start someone over him. But, am I willing to buy him for anything close to what he's been valued at over the last couple off seasons? No, not really.
I think it's Darnell Mooney. That guy, with how involved he is really taken away from Kyle Pitts. I do think that Kirk Cousins, he has started to look better, so maybe that's a good sign for Kyle Pitts if this offense is going to be really good, but still, it is a concern. He had a big play. He had the end zone target still. So, I mean, would you rather start him or Kelsey, Justin? And how are you feeling about Kelsey at this point?
No comment. No, so Kelsey is my most rostered. I've got him pretty cheap in a lot of places. Like in one place, I got him for like a second in Jaleel McLaughlin this offseason. And I bought low a lot. I haven't really overpaid for him, but I think I have 7 shares on 12 Dynasty rosters. I'm still doing fine. I'm not, most of those teams are like, I actually have him and like another tight end. In fact, some of them, I have one where I have Kelsey and Pitts, and I'm not sure who to start. But I'm really concerned about Kelsey. I don't know. It's people are talking about it. Every broadcast they're talking about it. What's wrong? Is it game script? Is it this? Is it that? Is it distractions? Yada yada yada. I'm worried. It's been 3 games, but I'm just hoping he puts together one of those 12 for 140 in 2 games and everything goes back to normal. But right now, like I'm probably starting Pitts over him. I'm considering sitting him in some other leagues that I have him. Where I was flexing him because it was a tight end premium for some wide receivers that I think are going to put up more points. It's not good. It's not good, Bob. Not good.
Yeah, I mean, there's the age concern with Travis Kelsey, and that's the thing is we saw him slow down last year, and it just seems to continue this year, along with Rashee Rice's ascension. And I mean, Justin, I asked David about Rashee Rice last week, kind of gauging where he might be in the dynasty ranks. I asked him, about guys like Devonta Smith, but after being the wide receiver 2 on the week, before the Monday night games. Would you rather have Rushy Rice or Chris Olave, who's wide receiver 13 on Keep Trade Cut? You can both answer, by the way.
You're telling me I have to answer that question?
I'll answer first. I'm still taking Olave personally, but it's a lot closer than it has been.
No comment. I I don't know. I I think I would if I was going from Olave to Rice. I feel like I want a plus, but I don't think I could get it.
I think I'm going with Rushy Rice at this point, honestly, because he's wide receiver 2 on the year right now, and he's a second-year player who he seems to be taking over as the number one target, like very, very clearly ahead of Travis Kelce with Patrick Mahomes, for the foreseeable future. So I'm very bullish on him. Tyreek Hill, are you guys taking him over Tyreek Hill at this point?
Probably.
I think so too. The reason you want Tyreek Hill is because he can be the wide receiver too, but he can't be the wide receiver too until two is back. And Rushy Rice is, I don't have age in front of me, but best guess 6 years younger, 5 years younger, something like that, and can be the wide receiver too right now. In fact, is. So yeah, I think based off of that Tua injury and just we're not sure he's on IR multiple more weeks. Who knows if he even comes back at the end of that on time, et cetera. I mean, yeah,
Yeah, I'm there too because the age gap's probably 6-7 years, and I'd much rather start Rushy Rice right now. And I'm probably at Tyreek Hill by a small margin when Tua's back, but I mean, you got to go with the young guy right here. How are you guys feeling about Drake London? Is he a lineup lock?
Oof, that's tough. I mean, you drafted him to where he probably still has to be, but if you got lucky and have a really deep roster, I could see mention him.
Deontay Johnson or Drake London?
depends on the matchup for me. To be
I was gonna say that, yeah, probably matchup dependent at this point, but still leaning London.
in a vacuum, London there, yeah. But I mean, one more week of Red Rocket, and holy smokes, Deontay Johnson might be the wide receiver one in Dynasty. Just kidding, of course.
Deontay Johnson's got.
Yeah, I do love Deontay Johnson, but I also have my right mind and sanity. I promise you, I do not think that Deontay Johnson is a even top 24 wide receiver in Dynasty. Although I do think he kind of is in redraft. He's right on the fringe of that in Dynasty for me. Wide receiver 30s. Moving on to our last games of the night. We're going to first talk about the Buffalo Bills. Wait, nobody else showed up to that game? Oh, I guess they did in the second half a little bit. They played the Jacksonville Jaguars, and we saw 4 first half touchdowns from Josh Allen. James Cook had a little bit of a day, but then Ty Johnson, Ray Davis cleaned up, both of them almost touching double digit fantasy points. Ty Johnson got there. From the wide receivers, we really only saw Khalil Shakir have a heck of a game, 6 for 72 and a touchdown. Keon Coleman had a touchdown, but not much else, only one target. We did see a little bit of garbage time for the Jaguars. Lawrence had a not so good day. ETN, 68 yards, 4 receptions to salvage it from a PPR standpoint. Christian Kirk, PPR at his weight of 16 points. It was an ugly game. We did see 3 for 5 for 41 and a touchdown from Kincaid. Nice to see that, but not a lot there. So, any big takeaways from this besides the fact that the Jaguars are we concerned about them going forward? Actually being able to put up consistent fantasy producers at this point for us?
Kind of have to be. They've been inconsistent to this point. There's players we like there. I don't expect them to be this bad every week, but man, we thought ETN was a top 6 potentially running back. That doesn't look likely. We thought Kirk was going to be startable. That hasn't happened. Ingram's been out. I get that, but boy, this offense just has not looked good.
Yeah, I mean the pass protection for the Jaguars is really bad. I think it's really limiting just Trevor Lawrence and Brian Thomas Jr. I think Brian Thomas Jr. is somebody that you would hoping would really ascend and be a guy that you want to flex every single week, but I'm willing to, but it's pretty scary for Brian Thomas Jr. right now. It's nice to see Christian Kirk bounce back, but yeah, there's nobody you really want to start outside of ETN. I'd say Ingram is somebody to watch. He should be back soon. Are you guys starting Evan Ingram? You think every single week if you don't have really any good tight end options? Maybe Dallas Goedert's your tight end one.
The one place I have Ingram, I have no choice. So yeah, as soon as he's ready, I'm sliding him back into the lineup.
Yeah, I mean, outside of being just loaded, if I had McBride, Bowers types of plays, I'm probably sliding him back in pretty much as soon as he is cleared as well. I feel like probably you're incredibly lucky if you have a better option.
Yeah, another tight end position for the Bills. I mean, Dalton Kincaid looks to be pretty good here. I think the game script for week 2 against the Dolphins really made everything look pretty poor for him, but he's somebody that you feel really confident starting going forward.
I mean, the only concern I have for this Bills team is the not so small chance that this game script that, limited him to, 5 targets is the same game script that we see for at least 10 more of their games this year.
Yeah, but didn't we see it this week and it didn't play out nearly the same way? I mean, it's definitely a little concerning, but they controlled this game from the start, and Allen still had an incredible day. Cook probably did too, but I'm not quite as worried about games where they pull ahead as I was last week because of that.
Yeah, but if there's only a half of play, which I think we could see this happen a handful of times this year more, and they don't get the touchdown, then we're pretty disappointed in the receiving options. I don't know that I'm necessarily that concerned for Allen, but I think it really does concern me for a lot of the receiving options. I certainly, like I said, I don't view him even as like a tier 2 tight end necessarily. I think he needs to do something more to like show that he's up there. I mean, that being said, I think I view Laporta now as like a tier 2 tight end. Like he's dropped down a little bit, and I do still view Kincaid a little bit below him. So I don't know. I am a little bit concerned about the passing options there. Like I don't know who to start on a weekly basis. It's whoever gets the touchdown almost, and maybe Shakir.
I'm not any more concerned than I am about like Kyle Pitts and Travis Kelsey, Mark Andrews though. So yeah, I still think you're going to probably be starting Kincaid every week.
Tight ends are rough, man. Anything else there, guys? Are ready to move on to the next one?
Move on.
All right. So next game, we actually, thank God, we saw a game. Good to see. Love to see it. 2 quarterback studs, 32 points for Jaden Daniels, 31.3 for Joe Burrow. Joe Burrow, sorry though, man. It's really a bummer, but you are a day late on being the first quarterback to get 300 passing yards and 3 touchdowns. Shouldn't have played on Sunday night, bro, or Monday night, bro. Sorry about that. Jaden Daniels, 254 and 2 through the air, though. 21 for 23. He looked pretty good when I was watching before we started recording. When I was watching every play, this guy looks like he could play football. We saw Zach Moss really dominate the fantasy points and the targets, more importantly. Out touched him 17-9, including out targeting him 6-3. Love to see that. Austin Eckler did not have a lot of touches, got a touchdown. B-Rob got a touchdown as well. Both of them, you're happy but not ecstatic about it. Jamar Chase, absolute game. 6 for 118 and 2. Terry McLaurin, 4 for 101. And then Gesicki and Ertz both had decent, not great games. It was a fun game. It was a fun game. Did you end up winning your matchup there, David?
I don't think so. Let me double check here just because we're still on.
Eh.
I lost by 2 points, less than 2 points, to arguably the worst roster in the league, but still had the second highest score by over 10 points. Brutal.
Hate to see it. I mean, actually, I love to see it.
Yeah, I think one of my biggest takeaways here is, I mean, is Zach Moss, if they're in a bad game script and he's going to get 6 targets more than Chase Brown in the receiving game, that's very interesting, especially because Zach Moss got the goal line touchdown as well. I think he's probably someone that you want to start unless you have 2 really good running backs. I mean, the Bengals always start slow. I think it's going to still be a pretty solid offense. I mean, I'm starting him over Dowdle, that's for sure. I don't know exactly where the line is, but is he a flex play every week for you guys if you have him?
Got to be in consideration at least, yeah.
I have a handful of rosters where I'm starting him as an RB2. I think my redraft league, he's technically my RB1. So I'm very happy to start him, slot him into my lineup. I think he's a solid RB play. If you could get him for a second at this point, a late second, still, like if someone's still willing to charge you that or like let you get him for a late second, I'd be very happy to pay that if I need RB.
Yeah, I think that Andre Yoshivas getting 7 targets, 5 catches for 52 and a touchdown. T. Higgins, it was his first game back, but 6 targets. I mean, I think that Yoshivas being pretty involved in this offense really makes me kind of concerned about T. Higgins. Not like full red alert yet, but how much does that worry you guys with Yoshivas's involvement for T. Higgins?
Coming back from the injury, I'm not reading into it. I think Higgins is a heck of a football player. I think Yoshevich is just a guy. Fun name, just a guy.
I was going to say, we can tell by how you mispronounce his name every single time. I don't know if you've caught on to that, but it used to be, I think, Yoshevich something. You're getting closer.
Just call him Yoshi.
Hey,
He's
Yoshi.
Jokic. Yeah, Yoshi.
Jokic.
You know, I'll be honest, we've been recording through the second half of this game pretty much, and I haven't really looked at the stats, so I'm not going to draw any massive conclusions on air here. I'm concerned if Yoshivas has a lot of involvement going forward, but it's an injury return for Higgins. We know he's a stud, so I'm not too concerned at this point.
I don't know if he's a stud. That's just my thing. I think he's more of a wide receiver 2 back end kind of guy. And if he's not as involved, that's at least something to keep an eye on. Are you putting Higgins into your wide receiver 3 slot next week? I mean, you're probably playing like Deontay over him, but I don't know if I'm going to automatically lock him in next week. But probably.
Yeah, I need to look more into it. I don't even know what he did tonight.
I mean, for me, it just comes down to who else I have. I view him as a top 36 wide receiver play, probably. But I view him as probably in that wide receiver 30 to 36 range of the top 36. Like, he's not a wide receiver 2 lock. And there's certainly a lot of teams, especially in Dynasty where you have tanking teams. 3 teams are tanking in the league. So the top 36 wide receivers are often, distributed between 7 to 8 teams, for not necessarily that evenly, right? So there's certainly a lot of Dynasty rosters where you're going to see T. Higgins probably riding the bench until people see it from him. But that being said, I do still think if you put the over under at 12 and a half PPR fantasy points for next week, I'm probably taking the over on it just with Joe Burrow, probably even getting a touchdown. And the fact that I think he's a solid player, still a decent play. I'm not upset about it. And if people are panicking on him after this, I'd definitely be willing to buy him for anything that costs less than a first round pick because I still, in my book, he's worth a first round pick. I just don't want to pay that for him because I'd rather have the liquidity of a first round pick. So if it's a buy window after missing 2 games and then getting outplayed by Jokic,
Yoshi. Yeah, I do think Higgins, his value, as long as he doesn't have a terrible season, if he just has a fine season, he's going to be a free agent. I think that he's really going to get hyped up in the off season, assuming that he gets a pretty decent landing spot. So I don't hate buying him low for sure.
I am definitely relieved as a Terry McLaurin owner, my 1 share out of my 13 leagues, to see him actually doing something today. But I still have no confidence in starting him as anything other than a top 40-ish wide receiver, third flex in a start 11. I'm pinching him into my lineup because I have to, but not any confidence. But I do want to talk about Jaden Daniels. This guy, I'm excited. He's looking good. He's running, and actually watching him here, he is scrambling to pass a little bit too, which week 1 we were just seeing him scramble. So I'm very interested in watching how he keeps going and how he keeps playing. Let's have like a little gut reaction based on the fantasy reality of what we've seen so far. Would either of you take Jaden Daniels over Caleb Williams at this point in Dynasty fantasy football?
Not yet.
Pretty close, but he's playing. He's putting up points, and Caleb Williams isn't a certainty for that. So I'm not quite ready there, but it's a good question though.
I think I'm considering it honestly at this point, just because of the fact that he's already proven he can break the game, and Caleb hasn't even really proven that much that he can really play the game, on that high of a level. I mean, he hasn't been terrible. 30 fantasy points. We've seen, 2 elite fantasy performances from Jaden Daniels, QB3 week 1 and then this 32 points here. I'm pretty ecstatic about what he's doing so far. So I think I'd try to get a plus, but I think like in a rookie draft, if I had to redraft the rookie class in a super flex, I think I might go Daniels over Caleb. But I think in the trade market, I'd try to exploit the trade market. Any other comments, guys?
I think that's about it for week 3.
All right. Well, it was a good week 3. We are excited to do the same with you guys week 4. Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Dino Construction Podcast. We hope we found this as useful for you as it was for us. Please remember to like and subscribe wherever you listen or view. And from all of us here at the Dino Construction Podcast, until next time.